Oh yes, you are absolutely right, and I'm not done talking about it. I had to take a break from talking about it because it's very triggering, but now I'm back. Let's talk about how much more dangerous the environment became in the military for marginalized groups under Trump. Whether you like the military or not, I'm going to tell you why this should concern you. First of all, let me say that the amount of blocking and deleting that I have had to do in the comment section for this post is ridiculous. Oh, you're in the Air Force. Why are you complaining? Oh, you're delusional. What happened to you wasn't because of Trump. You're stupid. Sexual assault and harassment happens in the military anyways, under any president. You are stupid. What happened to you has nothing to do with race. Despite the hundreds of comments from other veterans under this post confirming that what I said is true. First of all, before you pop off at me, I told you where exactly you can find the entirety of my story on the long form content app under a very long playlist. I told you where you can find it because I will not be recounting it in detail again. I will not be triggering myself again, and I do not use the word trigger lightly. I have PTSD. If I tell you the story again, I'm gonna have to pop a Xanax. That's how bad it was. I don't want to do that. I'm not a moron. I know that sexual assault and harassment happens every day in the military anyway. Nature of what happened to me, how freakish the situation was, and the amount of things that were allowed to happen to me out in the open, not covered up. The fact that my abuser, who was my commander, her boss, joined in on the torture, and everybody knew. She targeted every woman of color in my squadron in some way, shape, or form. Out in the open, terrorized every single one of us. The only reason that I got 95% of her attention, her words, not mine, is because I was the second highest ranking person in that squadron next to her. Threatening to send me to jail just because she could, saying, with the implication of race, who are they going to believe? Me or you? Me, a white major, or you, a black lieutenant? Because of Trump emboldening awful people within the military ranks, more things were allowed to happen out in the open without being covered up. Is that simple enough for you? Before we get into what this comment addresses, let me tell you why you should care about this, whether you like the military or not. The military is a microcosm of some sorts of the American population. It's not a perfect representation at all, especially when it comes to gender representation. But hey, it's something. Regardless, it is a sample size of the American population that is directly impacted by the decisions that the president makes. Military members are well-paid slaves. Our bodies belong to the government. They test vaccines on us, for God's sake. The president makes a policy move, it might take a while to actually affect the American people. But for military members, it affects us immediately. AKA, it is a preview for the rest of you of what a president would do to all of us if they had absolute power. I am shaking. Let's see, where should we start? Oh, the trans ban. A few years prior, when I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy, we had made the very sluggish progression of repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The idea of queer people being able to just say they're queer and not lose their jobs being progressive is crazy. We went from that to Trump banning transgendered people in the military. I remember the day that memo came out and we were all like, what do? We know trans people on this base. That was so crazy that as bad as it already was as far as the environment in the military, I cannot speak to what happened on other bases, but at my base, what leadership told us to do, and when I say leadership, I do believe I mean leadership as high up as the Pentagon. They were like, just carry on business as usual, please. They're like, what? Does all trans people have to start like out processing right now? What? Even if business did carry on as usual, I can only imagine the terror. Of being a trans person when that memo came down, reading that memo. Because of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, they were actually offering re-enlistment to queer service members that had been kicked out for being discovered as queer. Basically a huge step backwards. That targeted specifically trans people, but let's talk about the fact that overall diversity and inclusion training for the military that had before been mandatory was done away with by order of Trump. Diversity and inclusion training, along with sexual assault response training, was always treated as a joke in the military. A lot of people never took it seriously, and honestly, sometimes the course material was a little lackluster. Now the military didn't even have that box to performatively check to say we care about diversity and inclusion. So that was a statement that diversity and inclusion and the safety of marginalized military members was not important at all. It would not be treated as a priority or an issue at all. Even if you don't believe my story has anything to do with Trump emboldening folks, it might be a little hard to say that that doesn't have anything to do with it. You want to know something else really girly pop? A lot of white nationalist groups, homegrown terrorist groups, and this has been going on for a long time, a lot of them will send young members of those groups to the military for short contracts so they can go learn certain skills like, I don't know, firearms training, combat training, familiarity with ordinances, things that go boom. So that after their contract, they can go back to their group and utilize those skills. Under the Trump presidency, white nationalist group activity went up about 55%. The amount of activity like that, using the military as training grounds for their shenanigans, that went up too. More white nationalists felt safe joining the military, more confident than ever that they would not be caught or punished. What else? Oh yes, this other thing that I actually had to look up to make sure that I wasn't tripping. 2020, I want to say the winter, when Trump lost, two very high-ranking women in the officer corps were up for general. The Pentagon delayed their promotions to general for until after Biden's inauguration. They were afraid that because they were women, Trump wouldn't let it happen. Also, for their safety, because emboldening. Yes, you should care, because the military is a group of people that have to abide by what the president says and does without saying no. Saying no means you get thrown in jail. We can't just put in our 2 weeks. If we could, trust me, a lot of us would have. The president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the United States. Complete power over us, unchecked. That is what his unchecked power yielded. And if you don't believe me, you can look at all the veteran comments, white, black, POC, queer, straight, everything in between, confirming that I am right. If that being a possible reality for you is still an acceptable possible reality for you, well, it's not for me, and it's not for a lot of us. For that reason, we are not going back. Thank you for this comment.